at 9:10 on a Saturday, declared Heritage Weekend by people who owned Bunting, Broxham and daughter unveiled its new window. Mr. Broxham had no daughter, and the bunting was slightly mildewed, but the curtain came down on schedule to reveal velvet, glass, and outrage. In the center of the display lay the mayor of Flaxborough's chain of office, sunburst medallion, civic enamel and all, resting on a blue cloth as complacently as a haddock on a slab. Someone had tied to it a stiff little price tag, £19.50 in a tidy, forward-leaning hand. There was a moment of quiet in which pedestrians forgot to be pedestrians and became a crowd, and the mayor, who had come to cut a ceremonial length of twine across the doorway, forgot to be indignant and became picturesque. He put one gloved hand to his collar as if checking for his Adam's apple. The council clerk, who never trusted Saturdays, produced a notebook. A small boy took a photograph and was told to take it again without smiling. The bell of St. Swithin's struck the quarter, which always sounded like municipal sarcasm. Gossip, which had been keeping warm in various pockets of the town since breakfast, burst into the open. "Looks like a reproduction to me," said the ironmonger, "unless they've reduced gold to 13 shillings the ounce." "They borrowed it for the gala last night," murmured the verger. "And you know what borrowing leads to." "Broxham's never paid VAT properly. This is his way of settling," announced a pub man with the confidence of stout. "The mayor's chain?" "Nonsense. It's the mayoress's necklace, and I should know," said a woman who should not have known. "If the council can't mind its plate, it shouldn't have any," added a councilor, enjoying the chance to be stricter than himself. Sergeant Love arrived with the delicacy of a man approaching a goose with temperament. Inspector Purbright walked beside him, hat in hand, looking not at the chain, but at the window glass, where a long, pale scuff arced across the inside like a chalked smile. The velvet beneath the chain had 2 small square indentations beside the medallion, not quite symmetrical, as if something had sat there briefly and then thought better of it. The price tag string was thin and white. Everything else in the window wore Broxham's usual red and white baker's twine. "Anonymous donation?" asked Love, already fishing in his pocket for a notebook he seldom used, and then using it industriously. Mr. Broxham produced himself from the shop door, wiping his hands on a cloth notable for having done more for dust than dust had ever done for it. "Left on me step," he said, "bag and all." "Never saw who." "I was as startled as anyone. I intended to take it to the police first thing Monday, but you know how Saturdays are, Sergeant, and Sundays. Well, the police are at church, I suppose." "Most of them attempt it," Love said. "Why the price tag?" "Habit," said Broxham, with a doomed cheerfulness. "One marks things, one labels things." Professional reflex Purbright, who had been considering the reflection of chrysanthemums in the grocer's bucket across the road, turned back to the window. The medallion of the chain lay upside down, the enamel shield inverted like a sleepy face. The tag's handwriting leaned forward, brisk and modern. Broxham's own labels on a pair of brass candlesticks and a pouting Staffordshire spaniel, slanted politely backwards as though apologizing for charging at all. On the blue cloth near the clasp was a tiny green smear, metallic in color, as if a finger damp with polish had decided to rest there while thinking of something else. "Inspector," the mayor ventured, finding his indignation again and putting it on like a scarf that didn't quite match. "We must retrieve the chain." "A moment," Purbright said, mild as tea left to stand. He looked up at the corner of the window where the scuff ran. "It has not been here long," he added, almost to himself. "How can you tell that, sir?" Love asked, earnestly inviting the rest of the town to hear the answer. "The chrysanthemums in Mrs. Dallimore's bucket," Purbright murmured, still looking at the glass. "They are reflected clearly now. They were not when I passed earlier. The inside was fogged." He let the remark sit there like a visiting relative. Then, in a tone fit for asking the time, he added, "Not quite the arrangement one expects near chrysanthemums." The mayor, who never liked being arranged, signalled at once to the council clerk, who signalled to Love, who signalled to a constable to go inside and fetch the object before someone else fetched it. Mr. Broxham fluttered his cloth and held the door with the air of a man welcoming an audit. Inside, the window display smelt of old velvet and beeswax and another polish with a sharper, foreign note that said it had been bought by people who trusted labels. Love indicated the chain with his pencil, careful not to touch either. "We'll take this into evidence," he said, using a phrase he had liked on the wireless. "Would you?" Purbright said mildly to Broxham. "Mind telling us again, slowly, about your morning?" Broxham told it. The unlocking, the kettle, the blind drawn up, the mysterious carrier bag on the step, the mild start of a man discovering his future in the shape of prison. He had opened the bag, recognized the chain, and, here his honesty seemed to stab him, placed it on the velvet so no one would tread on it. He had, he confessed, popped a tag on, purely to stop it getting mixed with the lower-stoffed saucer I was cleaning. "You thought the mayor's chain might be mistaken for a saucer," Love repeated, giving the audience a respectable laugh. "I thought my table was in a muddle," said Broxham stoutly. Purbright's gaze moved, not to the chain, but to the blue velvet, beneath it. Two faint, dust-dark rectangles, like shadows of small boxes, flanked the medallion. On the glass, the inside scuff met the edge of a brass screw whose slot carried a fresh burr. He stooped, examining the price tag's hole, ragged, as if punctured by something heated rather than pierced by a clean pin. He straightened, the way a man straightens, not because he has finished looking, but because he has found something inconvenient. Outside, the crowd rearranged its speculations. "He's had it for years," the ironmonger insisted. "I saw that chain when I came in for nails, 97. "Chains can't be left overnight," the verger declared. "They catch cold and tarnish." "If the mayor bought it back, would that be corruption or retail therapy?" asked the pub man. "It's obviously a rehearsal for the carnival," the councilor concluded. "We must discourage rehearsal." "Sergeant," said Purbright, "ask Mr. Broxham if any note came with the bag." "No note," said Broxham, but he sounded as if notes happened to other people. The constable lifted the chain very carefully, as one lifts a sleeping cat that belongs to a magistrate. As he did, the tag stirred and the blue cloth rucked slightly. Something pale and small, which had lain flat as a guilty thought, became visible. A folded scrap of cartridge paper, no bigger than a visiting card, tucked under where the medallion had been. Love's pencil hovered, then tapped. The constable, with 2 fingers, teased the paper free and handed it across. Love unfolded it and read aloud, because the crowd, outside or inside, would have willed him to. The letters were typed, neat, spaced like a row of prim roses. "Return the other one." There was a second's silence, not the respectful kind, but the silence a street makes when it realizes it has turned the wrong way and must do it again in front of everybody. The mayor blinked. The council clerk drew a line in his notebook and found it did not help. Broxham clasped his cloth as if it might testify for him. "The other one?" Love said, dutifully supplying the question everyone else had already adopted. "Sir, what other one?" Purbright looked at the upside-down medallion, then passed it at the 2 square impressions in the velvet, and finally at the thin white string of the price tag. He did not answer Love. He looked instead at Mr. Broxham with the mildness of a man noticing a draught and wondering whose window it came from, before anyone could decide whether the message was a joke or an instruction. The council clerk's telephone rang in his pocket, loudly and with an air of public service. He fumbled it open, listened, and paled. "Inspector," he said, his voice doing its best to become private and failing. "The strong room at the town hall. Everything's intact. The official chain is on its hook." He glanced at the chain in the constable's hands, then at the note in Love's. So, what, exactly, he finished weakly, have we got here? The revelation that the genuine chain of office still hung safely in the town hall strong room caused an audible shift in the mood of the crowd. The mayor, never gifted with flexibility, looked betrayed by both reality and circumstance. He cleared his throat, half in relief and half in fear that relief might prove premature. "Then what, pray, is this object?" he demanded, gesturing towards the constable, who was holding the glittering impostor as though it might turn suddenly into a live eel. Purbright did not answer immediately. He studied the duplicate with the indulgent gravity of a man regarding an amateur theatrical performance. Poorly staged, but not without some local charm. The chain was convincing enough at a distance, gilt bright enough to soothe the casual eye, links substantial enough to please the vain, medallion colorful enough to reassure a visiting alderman. Up close, however, the enameling bore tiny bubbles where a craftsman with less patience than honesty had hurried his work, and one of the links had been soldered shut with a clumsiness that would not have deceived a choir boy. "An imitation, naturally," said the council clerk, trying to regain the dignity of minutes and paper clips. "Whoever placed it there was playing a joke, though I must say rather in poor taste." He made a note to that effect, which under his pencil's pressure became less a note than an accusation. Sergeant Love, who had been turning the folded message over in his hand, tapped the words once more with his pencil, returned the other one. "So if this is not the town's chain, what chain do they mean?" "Could be some collector's piece, sir. Or jewelry." "It is possible," Purbright replied mildly, "that the writer intended us to believe in a first theft, thereby distracting us from a second." He glanced again at the velvet cloth in the window. The two small, square impressions remained there like ghosts of boxes once present. One cannot help wondering what sat beside our counterfeit chain before the curtain was drawn. Broxham fidgeted at the shop doorway, aware that speculation was becoming tethered to him like a stubborn goat. "Inspector, I tell you, there was nothing else. Just the bag on the step. I opened it, found the chain, laid it out. Habit, as I said, and went to make tea." That is all. His tone hovered between sincerity and self-defense, as though his soul were a ledger nervously awaiting audit. Purbright let the words settle without endorsing them. He preferred to test facts by silence. Often they wilted or grew stronger depending on their roots. At last, he said, "We shall want to see this bag, if you please." A search in the back of the shop produced it. An ordinary brown carrier, slightly damp on the base as though set down in haste upon a pavement still drying from early rain. Inside clung a faint aroma of polish and something sharper, lacquer perhaps, or glue. Purbright lifted it delicately by the edges, eyes narrowing on a faint smudge of green along the fold, a twin to the smear already noticed on the velvet. Outside, gossip sprouted afresh, tended by the light breeze of uncertainty. "Could be part of that burglary ring. Remember the bicycles?" said the ironmonger, confidently muddying last year's crime with this one. "More likely the masons. They hoard regalia." "I've seen aprons," declared the verger. "Sounds foreign to me," said the pub regular. "Typed notes and duplicate jewelry. Continental methods, you can tell. The mayor should resign," the councilor concluded, "for allowing resemblance." Love dutifully wrote down each speculation as though gossip were evidence and evidence was gossip, which in Flaxborough was frequently the case. He then closed the notebook with a clap, as if to lend the collection of nonsense a finality it did not deserve. The mayor, meanwhile, was regaining his bluster. "I insist this imitation be confiscated at once. I cannot have the borough's dignity undermined by parodies in shop windows." He spoke as though dignity were a commodity rationed by the ounce. "It will be removed," Purbright assured him, nodding to the constable, who carefully folded the chain into a paper wrapper. Then, turning to Broxham, he asked, Did you recognize the handwriting on the price tag? Broxham looked wounded. Inspector, if you'll forgive me, I've spent 40 years knowing handwriting. Shop labels, customer notes, auction lists. I could tell a Norfolk knot from a Yorkshire cross. This, he jabbed a finger at the tag, is no hand from around here. Too neat, too fast. Ours bend and wobble, but this one marches forward as if it had somewhere to be. Love gave an appreciative grunt, the sound of a man noting a detail without understanding it. Foreign again, perhaps, he suggested, which gave the pub regular outside reason to bellow agreement. Purbright returned the tag to his pocket, expression unreadable. We shall look into the matter more closely, he said, which in his idiom meant both reassurance and caution. In the meantime, Mr. Broxham, it would be helpful if you refrained from tidying any further unusual deposits until we have inspected them first. Broxham's agreement was earnest, though colored by the knowledge that deposits meant customers, and customers meant survival. With the counterfeit chain secured, the note pocketed, and the mare coaxed towards the council car for safety and tea, Purbright and Love began a slow circuit of the street. The scuff on the inside glass of the window was mirrored by a smear on the outside, faint but parallel. Purbright bent slightly, measuring with his gaze the way one arc lay almost upon the other, as though some hurried adjustment had been made from both sides of the pane. "Sir," Love asked after a pause, "do you think whoever planted it wanted to be caught? I mean, price tags, scuffs, notes. Seems more like a performance than a theft." "Perhaps," Purbright murmured. "But performances have audiences, Sergeant. The question is, was it meant for us or for someone else entirely?" They returned to the police car under the collective stare of Flaxborough's citizens, each of whom already considered himself at least partly a witness, and some, more optimistically, a suspect. Purbright allowed himself a faint smile at the thought. The town, he reflected, was never happier than when halfway between scandal and solution. As the car pulled away, the crowd began to disperse reluctantly, gossip following in its wake like the chatter of starlings. Yet in the quiet of the back seat, Inspector Purbright's mind rested not on gossip, but on that folded note with its brisk command. "Return the other one." He had no doubt there was, somewhere in Flaxborough, another chain, or something masquerading as one, and its absence would soon declare itself. The question remained only how, and at whose expense. The following morning began with a drizzle that polished the cobblestones to a sheen and encouraged umbrellas to bloom prematurely along the high street. Inspector Purbright, however, had no umbrella, and appeared content to let the mist collect on his coat as he and Sergeant Love made their way towards the station. The counterfeit chain, wrapped carefully and locked away, had not yielded more in the night than it had in the day. What it had done, however, was seed a crop of theories across Flaxborough that sprouted faster than the drizzle could dampen. Love, tugging his cap lower against the weather, recited some of the morning's yield. "Mrs. Spratt at the bakery says she's sure the message was meant for her brother. Apparently, he once bought a medal off a peddler in Doncaster, and it went missing." "Indeed," Purbright said mildly, sidestepping a puddle that carried the reflection of a signboard for Finest Teas, established 1871. "The message was typed, Sergeant. Would Mrs. Spratt's brother be accustomed to typing his threats? Not unless Doncaster's peddlers are more modern than I thought." Love gave a sheepish grin. "But the idea's spreading. Mr. Hudd at the post office says it's connected with a shipment of registered letters gone astray last month." Purbright's eyes twinkled faintly. "And do you believe it?" Love hesitated, then admitted, "Not exactly. But everyone seems sure it points to something else entirely. No one agrees what, though they were met at the station by Constable Bradshaw, a young man who took every instruction as though it were both command and personal compliment. He presented them with a clipboard of notes. "Sir, we've canvassed along Market Street." No one claims to have seen who left the bag, but 2 witnesses recall a man loitering near Broxham's before opening time. Tall, wore a raincoat and carried, he consulted the page, a cardboard box tied with string. Purbright accepted the clipboard, read, and nodded once. String, yes. He handed it back. Mr. Broxham's twine is red and white. The tag was fixed with plain white. A different hand, perhaps a different box. Bradshaw colored slightly, as though rewarded. Shall we put out a description, sir? Purbright's pause was almost kindly. We might, though half the men in Flaxborough own raincoats and string. Let us hold our horses until we know which stable they've bolted from. Leaving the station, Purbright turned their steps towards the market square. It was Saturday, and stalls were setting up beneath striped awnings. Apples gleamed, cabbages sulked, and piles of bric-a-brac promised hidden treasures to those whose eyes were keener than their judgment. Purbright moved slowly, greeting vendors with nods, pausing here and there to study not the wares, but the way eyes flickered when the subject of Broxham's display arose. Snippets floated around them like confetti. They say it was made in Birmingham, gilt from gas lamps, melted down. More like Birmingham. France. They've got forgers there. Funny thing, I've got a brooch gone missing just last week. Perhaps that note was for me. The mayor's lucky it wasn't nailed to the stocks with a notice about his expenses. Love's pencil scratched in his notebook, though the sheer volume of contradiction soon made him stop with a sigh. We'll have a library of nonsense at this rate. Nevertheless, Sergeant, nonsense is seldom wasted. It tells us who wishes to be thought knowledgeable, who fears exposure, and who enjoys performance. Each has its uses. It was at the far end of the square, near a stall offering second-hand books and maps, that Purbright paused longer. A thin man in a faded overcoat was browsing among the volumes with exaggerated care. When he looked up, his eyes darted briefly towards the inspector, then away, too quickly for comfort. Purbright strolled over, picked up a dog-eared atlas, and remarked conversationally, "The price of paper has not improved." The man's lips twitched. "That's true, sir." Not since the war, his accent carried the faint trace of a district not quite local. "Visiting Flaxborough?" Purbright asked pleasantly. The man hesitated, then said, "Passing through. Thought I might find something of value here." His gaze flickered towards the inspector again, then dropped to the atlas as if to anchor itself. Purbright nodded, set down the book, and moved on without another word. Love, puzzled, caught up. "Sir, you recognized him." "I recognized his manner," Purbright replied softly. "A man trying too hard to seem unremarkable often proves the opposite. We shall see if he reappears." By noon the drizzle had ceased, but the town's chatter had only thickened. In the King's Head, where Purbright and Love paused briefly for a sandwich and coffee, the patrons were already drafting their verdicts. One elderly fellow with a nose redder than his tie swore blind he had seen the duplicate chain weeks ago in a junk shop in Lincoln. Another insisted it had belonged to a theatrical society that once performed The Mayor of Zalgarth in the town hall. The landlord offered the most practical view. If someone wanted the mayor out of his chain, they'd have to use more than velvet and tags. They'd need rope through it all. Purbright listened without comment, except once when Love repeated the typed words again under his breath. "Return the other one." "It seems," the inspector said mildly, "that the chain is not the beginning of our story, but the middle." As they left the pub, a woman approached them, skirts brisk with indignation. Mrs. Malison, who oversaw the church flower rota with martial precision, spoke in a tone designed to be overheard. "Inspector, I hope you're aware that another item has vanished. The brass collection box from St. Swathin's porch is missing this morning. Empty, mind you. It's always empty, but missing all the same." Love blinked. "And you think it has something to do with yesterday's matter?" "I think," Mrs. Malison said firmly, that people who misplace chains will misplace anything. And I, for one, won't be blamed for it. She marched off, leaving behind the faint scent of carnations and disapproval. Purbright stood very still, watching her retreat. His eyes, mild as ever, carried a flicker of thought. "Sergeant," he said at last, "I think we must pay another call on Mr. Broxham before the afternoon is out. There are boxes missing, impressions left behind, and now a collection box that has gone wandering. One begins to wonder whether the imitation chain was meant as distraction or as invitation." Love frowned. "Invitation to what, sir?" "To look elsewhere," Purbright murmured, "while something closer to home is being quietly carried off." The Sunday morning service at St. Swithin's was generally a sleepy affair, enlivened only by the occasional stumble at the lectern or the choir boy whose voice broke in mid-verse. On this particular morning, however, the congregation found themselves jolted awake not by hymn or sermon, but by an interruption that left the vicar pale and the verger speechless. The hymn board had been carefully arranged to announce, "Guide me, O thou great Redeemer," yet when the first note struck, the choir burst instead into a bawdy drinking song, their sheets filled with neatly typed lyrics to "When Jones's Ale Was New." For a dreadful moment the congregation sat frozen, until the chorus began, and two elderly parishioners, out of long habit rather than mischief, joined in heartily before realizing their error. Laughter, muffled and embarrassed, rippled through the pews. The vicar, crimson about the ears, brought the hymn to a shuddering halt and signaled frantically for silence. Yet the sheets remained in every hand, unmistakable in their uniform type and the same forward-leaning print that had been seen on the price tag in Broxham's window. By the time Inspector Purbright and Sergeant Love arrived, summoned hastily by the verger's urgent bicycle, the congregation was still gathered in little knots outside the porch. Some were amused, others affronted, all united in the conviction that something underhand had invaded their Sunday calm. Mrs. Malison, flushed with outrage, met them on the steps. "It's sacrilege, Inspector, to put drinking songs in place of hymns. I told you it would spread. First the chain, now the church." Purbright accepted the sheaf of substituted song sheets with mild attention, fanning them as though considering their paper weight. "A consistent typist, Sergeant," he remarked, "neat, brisk, and modern." Love compared one to the folded note they still carried. "It's the same, sir." "Has to be. But why do it here in church?" "Why indeed?" Purbright murmured, gazing at the bewildered parishioners. "Perhaps to remind us that parody has more bite in holy places than in shop windows." He bent slightly to examine the hymn board, where the numbers had been scuffed, as though changed in haste. At the foot of the board lay a small scrap of blue velvet thread, the kind used for lining cases. He picked it up delicately and tucked it away. The gossip outside was already weaving itself into contradictory cloth. "They say the choir practiced it all week. I heard them myself. No, it was slipped in by radicals. I read of it in the Express. Looks to me like Broxham's hand again. He'll be selling ale mugs next. Mark my words, it's Freemasons. They hate hymns." Love dutifully wrote each theory down, though the strain in his expression betrayed a man collecting nonsense with less enthusiasm than before. "Sir, if it's the same hand behind this as behind the chain, then they want attention." "But attention to what? A joke? A protest?" Purbright folded the sheets carefully. "A joke does not trouble itself with velvet threads, Sergeant. Nor does protest bother with forgery. We are dealing with someone who wishes us to chase appearances while they arrange realities elsewhere." The vicar approached, hat in hand, voice trembling. "Inspector, the collection box, still missing, and now this outrage. I fear the church is being made a stage for some play we do not understand." "Plays," Purbright said gently, "require audiences, Reverend. Your parish has provided one this morning, though not by choice." He inclined his head. May I see the vestry? Inside, the vestry was a jumble of cassocks, music books, and the lingering scent of polish. On the table lay a brass candlestick, gleaming too brightly for its age. Purbright touched it, then glanced at Love. "Newly cleaned, wouldn't you say?" Love nodded, puzzled. "Yes, sir." "Very shiny." "The polish is of the same scent as that on the imitation chain," Purbright observed, almost to himself. Whoever brought these sheets also had time to busy themselves with brass. Either they were tidying or leaving their mark. He pointed to the rim of the candlestick where a faint green smear lingered. Love frowned. So they're connected. The chain, the note, the hymn sheets, and now the brass. Someone's moving through town, leaving little calling cards. "Perhaps," Purbright replied. "Or perhaps they are showing us where not to look." Outside, the congregation had dispersed slowly, murmuring indignation into the drizzle. A few lingered to speculate further, giving Purbright another harvest of contradictions. A retired schoolteacher insisted the hymn prank was aimed at the mayor, whose fondness for ale was locally legendary. A councilman claimed it was the work of a dismissed clerk, still nursing resentment. A farmer suggested it was the act of outsiders determined to unsettle respectable folk. Purbright listened, his gaze drifting back to the church door, where the brass plate bore faint scratches around its lock, recent and hasty. He ran his thumb lightly over the marks and then looked up at the grey sky. "Sergeant," he said softly, "the chain in the shop window was not stolen at all." It was placed there to suggest a theft. The hymn sheets here are another suggestion. Our culprit, you see, is not robbing, they are rehearsing. The true performance has yet to begin. Love blinked at him. Notebook forgotten. "Rehearsing for what, sir?" "That," Purbright said with a dry smile, "is what we must find out before the curtain rises properly." The sound of the church bell marked the hour, its note carrying across the square, oddly discordant as though struck too hastily. Purbright turned to listen. For a moment he seemed to weigh the sound itself, then inclined his head toward the station. "Come, Sergeant. We must look at our notes again, and perhaps pay discreet attention to the town's rehearsal schedules." Love followed, frowning, while behind them the hymn board leaned askew, its numbers faintly scuffed, its authority undermined. A faint breeze lifted one of the discarded song sheets and carried it across the wet cobbles, where it came to rest against the door of the King's Head. A man stooped to pick it up, read the first bawdy line and laughed aloud. Within moments, the pub's doorway filled with curious heads, eager for scandal. By evening, the story of the church service had spread as far as the next village. Flaxborough, never short of opinions, now had a fresh stock to argue over. Yet, beneath the chatter, Purbright sensed a steady hand guiding these embarrassments with deliberate rhythm, as if testing the town's patience for something larger. By Monday morning, Flaxborough's appetite for scandal had reached the stage where theories hardened into certainties, and certainties inevitably required a culprit. The townsfolk, abetted by the local paper, found theirs in Mr. Broxham. His antique shop had, after all, been the stage for the first act of this curious drama. It was only logical, by Flaxborough logic, that the man who displayed the counterfeit chain and its mysterious message must be, at the very least, complicit in its arrival. The Flaxborough Chronicle printed a column that hinted as much, cloaked in respectable language. It observed that antiquarian establishments, while charming, may unwittingly provide opportunity for mischief-makers, particularly when their wares are displayed without sufficient vigilance. Readers took this as an accusation, and by breakfast the butcher was telling customers that Broxham had already confessed, while the chemist's assistant announced he would soon be charged. Sergeant Love, bringing these reports to Purbright at the station, wore an expression caught between indignation and resignation. "They've made up their minds, sir." Half the town thinks Broxham forged the chain himself to stir up trade. And the other half? Purbright asked, peering at a scrap of blue thread laid on his blotter. The other half think he's in league with someone else. The usual assortment: foreign agents, discontented aldermen, travelling salesmen. Love flipped open his notebook, but what they agree on is that it starts and ends with Broxham. Purbright's mild eyes shifted to the thread, then to Love. Agreement in Flaxborough, Sergeant, is usually a sign of mass error. Still, we shall see. They called upon Broxham late that morning, finding him surrounded by an air of affronted dignity. His shop window had been cleared of the velvet display, leaving only a forlorn china dog and 2 brass candlesticks. He greeted the inspector with weary courtesy, as though expecting yet another accusation. "I've read the Chronicle, Inspector. They'll be saying next that I pinched the crown jewels. I've been here 30 years without a blemish, and now the town's got me down as some sort of criminal." Purbright regarded him with sympathetic gravity. "Mr. Broxham, truth has a way of surviving gossip, though gossip seldom survives truth. Nevertheless, you will understand our need to inquire further." They sat in the cramped back room while Broxham recounted once again the discovery of the bag. Love asked the questions he had asked before, this time with more insistence. Did Broxham know anyone with access to a typewriter? Had he seen anyone loitering near the shop that morning? Could he explain the presence of velvet threads at the church vestry? Broxham spread his hands. "Inspector, half my business involves velvet linings, boxes, cases, stands. If a thread has turned up at the church, it's more likely from one of the parishioners' own keepsakes than from my shelves. As for typewriters, well, any solicitor's clerk could furnish you with those neat letters, but why lay it at my door, unless someone wants me ruined?" The last remark hung in the air. Purbright's gaze lingered on him. "That, Mr. Broxham, is a possibility worth considering." Outside, the street hummed with its own verdict. A group of townsfolk had paused deliberately near the shop, speaking loudly enough for Broxham to hear through the open door. Always said he was too clever with those labels. Mark my words, antiques dealers know how to fake things. It's their trade. He'll be gone before the week's out. If the police don't get him, the council will. Love bristled, but Purbright merely listened, head inclined as if their chatter were part of his evidence. When the murmurers moved on, he turned to the sergeant. "It is convenient, is it not? That suspicion has settled so quickly on Mr. Broxham. Convenient for whom, I wonder?" Their walk back to the station was interrupted by Constable Bradshaw, who hurried up with a fresh report. "Sir, there's been another incident. At the rehearsal for the town's pageant this afternoon, chaos by all accounts. The costumes were tampered with, the scripts altered. They're saying it nearly came to blows." Purbright exchanged a glance with Love. "The rehearsal," he repeated softly, recalling his own words at the church. "It seems our mischief-maker has chosen his next stage." They arrived at the town hall where the rehearsal had taken place. Inside they found the hall in disarray, discarded costumes, overturned chairs, and a script lying open on the floor, its neat typed pages revealing not the lines of the civic pageant, but instructions for a comic farce, mocking the mayor by name. Actors still muttered indignantly in corners, while the mayor himself paced with the fury of a man betrayed by the very fabric of civic pride. "This," he bellowed, brandishing one of the altered pages, "is sedition. To lampoon the borough's leadership in its own hall, it cannot be tolerated." Purbright accepted the page with calm interest. The typing was, again, neat, forward-leaning, and unmistakable. "Yes," he murmured, "the same hand. It appears our culprit enjoys theatre." Love looked about at the angry faces of the townsfolk. "And they'll all say Broxham did it, sir?" "They've already started." Purbright nodded faintly, his gaze resting on the words that mocked the mayor's speeches. Then it is time we stopped listening to what they say, Sergeant, and started asking why our playwright is so intent on rehearsal. If there is to be a true performance, it is surely close at hand. By Tuesday afternoon, Flaxborough had entered the condition it enjoyed most, simmering indignation seasoned with certainty. Broxham's supposed guilt was now treated as fact, and the pageant rehearsal fiasco had only confirmed in the minds of many that the antique dealer was orchestrating chaos for his own mysterious amusement. Posters appeared in the grocer's window offering antiques, authentic or otherwise, and the milkman was heard to ask if the town's next delivery would be labelled in neat, forward-leaning type. Purbright, meanwhile, remained unconvinced. He spent the morning in quiet note-taking, collating every item that bore the mark of their hidden author. The counterfeit chain, the typed note, the bawdy hymn sheets, the altered pageant scripts. Each was part of a pattern, though the picture it formed was still unclear. Love hovered anxiously, watching his superior's mild expression as if hoping it might betray some hint of revelation. Their deliberations were interrupted shortly after 3 o'clock, when Constable Bradshaw hurried into the office, breathless. "Inspector, something's happened at the council chambers." Meeting was disrupted, papers scattered everywhere, and they say the borough treasurer nearly fainted. When they arrived, the grand hall of the chambers looked more like the aftermath of a storm than a civic meeting. Chairs were askew, ledgers lay open on the floor, and the long oak table was strewn with what should have been budget documents, but were instead neatly typed sheets. Parodies again, this time lampooning councilors by name, suggesting scandalous misuse of funds, and even inserting absurd proposals, such as replacing the town's lampposts with ornamental maypoles. The treasurer, white as parchment, clutched at his briefcase as though it alone tethered him to sanity. Councilor Prowse, flushed with outrage, jabbed at one of the sheets. "Look at this, Inspector," suggesting that I diverted borough funds for a monumental bird bath in my garden. Preposterous. Everyone knows I favor fountains. Purbright examined the sheet calmly. The same typing, the same tidy slant. "Yes," he said quietly. "Our playwright continues." He picked up another page where the mayor was accused of hiring a juggler as civic advisor. It is curious how the humor stings more than accusation. A jest, after all, is harder to deny than a charge. Love busied himself collecting the scattered sheets, grimacing at their content. "They've been mixed right in with the real accounts, sir." No wonder the treasurer panicked. He pointed to the treasurer, who still trembled in his chair. "They could have voted on nonsense if no one noticed." "They very nearly did," muttered another councillor darkly. The mayor's hand was on the gavel when the treasurer squeaked. The gossip from those who had witnessed the meeting spread quickly into the street. It was revolution, pure revolution. No, satire. They've turned the council into a pantomime. Broxham's doing, of course. He's always disliked Prowse's fountains. If it goes on, they'll have to dissolve the borough and start again. Love leaned close to Purbright as they stepped aside to confer. "It's escalating, sir. First the chain, then the church, then the pageant, now the council. Each time it's bigger, more public. What's next?" Purbright looked thoughtful. "The pattern suggests crescendo, Sergeant. Each disruption builds upon the last. Our culprit is conducting Flaxborough as though it were an orchestra." He paused, his gaze moving to the treasurer's papers. "But orchestras require both rehearsal and performance. We have had rehearsal aplenty. The performance still waits." While Love gathered more statements, Purbright strolled the chamber with quiet eyes. On the window-sill he noticed faint smudges of green, metallic in hue. He touched them lightly, then held his fingers to his nose. The same polish again, sharp and foreign. Whoever had planted the parody sheets had also paused here, perhaps resting a hand while arranging their work. Back at the station later that evening, Love laid the parody sheets out in a row on the desk. They've all been typed on the same machine, sir, Bradshaw asked round the offices. No clerk owns one that makes letters this precise. Must be someone private. Private or careful, Purbright replied, studying the sheets. Notice the rhythm, Sergeant. Each jest cuts not at random but at pride, the mayor's dignity, the vicar's solemnity, the council's authority. Our playwright knows Flaxborough's weaknesses as well as any of us. Love scratched his head. And you think it's still about theft? Purbright gave a small, wry smile. If one intends to steal, one benefits by distracting. But distraction need not be crude. It can be made into entertainment so that the town laughs while the true prize is taken. At that moment a knock came at the door, and Mrs. Malison entered, formidable even in her flowered hat. "Inspector, I thought you ought to know. Our parish records are missing. I went to fetch the baptism ledger this afternoon and the shelf was bare. Just a scrap of velvet ribbon lying where the book should have been." Love groaned, while Purbright inclined his head with quiet satisfaction, as though an expected card had at last been played. "Thank you, Mrs. Malison. You have been most helpful." When she left, he turned to Love. "Do you see? While we all stared at parodies and performances, something tangible has been taken at last. A book, not a chain. The play is nearing its climax." Love frowned. "But why parish records, sir? What could anyone want with those?" "That," Purbright said gently, "is the question we must answer before the curtain falls." The theft of the parish records shifted the story into territory that even Flaxborough's most imaginative gossips found difficult to embroider. A missing chain could be a prank, hymn sheets a joke, the pageant disruption a farce, the council papers a lampoon, but parish ledgers, heavy with baptisms, marriages, and burials, had the gravity of Scripture. Their absence suggested not jest, but purpose. By Tuesday evening, the town's gossip thinned into uneasy speculation. Inspector Purbright, however, seemed quietly unsurprised. In the station office, he sat with the day's clutter arranged before him: parody scripts, hymn sheets, counterfeit chain, typed note, and now the report of missing records. He turned them over gently, as though they were pages in one large untidy book. Sergeant Love leaned against the desk, arms folded, still frowning. "It doesn't make sense, sir. Why records? What would anyone gain from knowing who was christened in 1908 or who married who in 1923? "Knowledge, Sergeant," Purbright said mildly, "is never without value. Sometimes it is even worth more than silver or gilt." He tapped the folded note with its command. "Return the other one. We have been invited to think of chains, but our culprit has always had his hand in boxes and books." Love shifted, uncomfortable. "You mean it was a smokescreen all along? The chain, the pranks, the scripts, they were just to keep people laughing while the real work was done?" Purbright inclined his head. "Laughter, Sergeant, is an excellent curtain. Behind it one can walk on stage unnoticed." Their conversation was interrupted by Constable Bradshaw, who entered carrying a small parcel wrapped in brown paper. "This came for you, Inspector?" "Left at the station desk half an hour ago." No name. Purbright unwrapped it carefully. Inside lay a single page, neatly typed, the letters brisk and forward slanting as before. It read, "The past is more dangerous than you think." Beneath the words was a faint smear of green polish. Love groaned. "They're taunting us now." "Or explaining," Purbright murmured. He folded the sheet and placed it with the others. "Our playwright wants us to understand that this is no theft of trinkets. The parish records hold the past of every family in this town. To disturb them is to disturb identity." Love looked doubtful. "Would anyone really go to all this trouble just to meddle with names in a book? Would you not, Sergeant, if one of those names held the key to fortune or disgrace?" The thought hung in the air until it was broken by the arrival of Mrs. Malison once more, flustered and sharp. "Inspector, I've just remembered something. Yesterday morning, before I noticed the ledger was missing, I saw a man in the vestry. Said he was waiting for the vicar. Thin fellow, grey overcoat, carrying a parcel with string. I thought nothing of it. He said he was delivering hymnals. But now..." She spread her hands meaningfully. Purbright's eyes flickered with recognition. Yes, the same man Sergeant Love and I saw at the market square. Browsing maps with exaggerated care. Love straightened. "So he's real. Not just another rumor." "Real enough," Purbright said softly, "but not careless. He wants to be noticed, just enough to plant the suggestion of a stranger in town." When Mrs. Malison departed, Love gave a low whistle. "So we've got a thin man in a grey coat, a typewriter, polish, and a taste for theatre. It's still thin, sir." "Thin," Purbright agreed, "but with edges sharp enough to cut." That night, Flaxborough buzzed less with laughter than with apprehension. In the King's Head, drinkers spoke in lower voices than usual. Some suggested the missing records were evidence of a long-forgotten scandal. Others insisted they had been stolen to erase a criminal past. One man swore the ledgers contained proof that the mayor's grandfather had been married twice. Another hinted darkly at hidden inheritances. Theories multiplied, each more elaborate than the last, yet all agreed on one point. The matter was no longer amusing. Purbright, strolling past the pub with Love at his side, heard the murmur through the open windows and smiled faintly. "You see, Sergeant, our culprit has altered the mood. Yesterday the town was laughing. Today it is afraid. Fear, too, is a curtain, though one with sharper edges." As they turned into the square, a sudden commotion drew their attention. A group of townsfolk had gathered around Broxham's shop again. His window, cleared of the chain days before, now displayed a single object, the missing parish ledger, propped upright on the velvet cloth, with a fresh price tag dangling from its clasp. The crowd pressed forward to stare, muttering, gesturing, speculating wildly. Broxham himself stood in the doorway, wringing his hands. "I don't know how it got there, Inspector. I locked up at 6, went to my supper, and when I returned just now it was sitting on the cloth, bold as brass." Love stared at the ledger in disbelief. "They're playing with us, sir. First they take it, then they put it back on display like a shop trophy." Purbright stepped forward, studying the window. On the cloth, beside the ledger, were 2 faint square impressions, just as he had seen beside the imitation chain. He looked back at Broxham, his voice quiet but firm. "This is no accident, mister. Broxham, someone has chosen you as their stage." The townsfolk's gossip rose to a new pitch around them. "There you are. Proof he's in it." "No, proof he's being framed. It'll be witches next, you'll see. Better witches than accountants." Purbright let the noise wash over him, his eyes fixed on the ledger, the tag, and the faint gleam of green polish on the glass. Then he spoke, more to himself than to anyone else. "The play is not yet over. This, Sergeant, is merely the interval." The return of the parish ledger to Broxham's window unsettled the town more thoroughly than its disappearance had done. Flaxborough was a place accustomed to losing things, purses, bicycles, reputations, but rarely did what was lost return so brazenly. That it should reappear in the same window where the counterfeit chain had once lain was too neat for coincidence, too theatrical for chance. By Wednesday morning, the townsfolk's voices carried a nervous edge, less like gossip and more like accusation, as though the whole town was waiting for the curtain to rise on an act no one had rehearsed for. Inspector Purbright, however, appeared as calm as ever. He stood with Sergeant Love outside Broxham's shop, hands in his coat pockets, gazing through the glass at the ledger. "Observe, Sergeant," he said quietly. "The same velvet cloth, The same squared impressions. And once again, the handwriting on the tag leans forward with admirable confidence. Our playwright has not changed his props. Love's eyes narrowed at the ledger. But why bring it back, sir? If they wanted it, why not keep it? And if they didn't, why take it at all? Because, Sergeant, sometimes the power lies not in possession, but in display. Purbright's gaze lingered on the faint smear of polish along the clasp. A thief who keeps an object hides it. A mischief maker who returns it makes a statement. Broxham, summoned from the back room, was pale with indignation. I tell you, Inspector, I had nothing to do with it. I locked the door last night, and when I opened up this morning, there it was. Someone must have a key, or else they've found a way to fiddle the lock. He ran a cloth nervously across the counter, as though to wipe away suspicion. Purbright regarded him kindly. Yes, Mr. Broxham, but you see the difficulty. When an object vanishes, the town blames you. When it reappears, the town blames you again. You have become our playwright's chosen scapegoat. Love added, a touch too firmly. Which means they want you ruined, sir. Framed, or, Purbright said mildly, they want us to think so. In theatre, Sergeant, nothing is so dangerous as assuming you know the playwright's intention. That afternoon, the gossip swelled into a storm. In the grocer's queue, he planted it himself. Wants to look innocent. Nonsense. He's the victim. Can't you see he's being made a fool of? If you ask me, it's that treasurer. He looked half dead at the council meeting, must have something to hide. No, it's the mayor. He wants sympathy. He's staging it all. At the King's Head, theories had acquired a sharper edge. A retired railway clerk declared it was clearly the work of outsiders, confidence tricksters from the city. A farmer argued it was the undertaker. After all, who else dealt in ledgers and names? A school teacher suggested the motive was genealogical blackmail, though she faltered when pressed for examples. Love collected the rumors dutifully, shaking his head as he handed them over. They've turned it into a parlor game, sir. Everyone's a suspect. Everyone always is, Sergeant, Purbright said gently. The difficulty is not in finding suspects, but in finding motives strong enough to bind them to action. The first glimmer of motive came, oddly enough, from the vicar, who called at the station that evening. He carried with him a letter, recently arrived by post. It contained no words, only a single typed line clipped from the parish register, an entry of a marriage performed in 1899. Beside it, in the same forward-leaning type, were the words, "This union should never have been recorded." Love stared at it, baffled. But that's decades ago, sir. Everyone in that entry must be long gone. Purbright studied the slip with interest. Not gone, Sergeant. Their descendants remain, and to unsettle the past is to unsettle the present. The vicar dabbed his forehead. Inspector, if these records are tampered with, or worse, destroyed, it will be as though people's lives never occurred. Imagine the confusion, families, inheritances, identities, all undone. When he left, Love turned anxiously to Purbright. So it's not about money or jewelry at all. It's about names, history. But who would care enough to go to these lengths? Someone, Purbright said softly, for whom the past is either a weapon or a secret to be concealed. That night, as darkness fell over Flaxborough, the town felt restless. Windows glowed with lamplight, but behind them conversations were hushed, suspicious. In several houses, old family Bibles and birth certificates were dug out of drawers, examined with fresh unease. A few residents swore they had heard footsteps in their gardens or seen a thin man pass beneath the lamplight and vanish into shadow. Purbright, walking the quiet streets with Love at his side, paused beneath the clock tower. Our culprit has played with parody and pageantry, he said, almost to himself. Now he plays with heritage. Soon, Sergeant, he will show us the heart of his performance." Love shivered slightly in the damp night air. "And when he does, sir?" Purbright looked up at the clock, its face dimly lit, the hands creeping towards midnight. "Then, Sergeant, we must be ready to see not just what is shown, but what lies behind the curtain." The wind carried the faint sound of a door slamming in the distance, and the echo seemed to linger too long, like the closing of a stage wing. By Thursday, Flaxborough's patience with its own confusion was wearing thin. Every street seemed to hum with speculation, but now the voices carried a sharper edge, as if laughter had finally given way to suspicion. The gossips wanted answers, and lacking them, were prepared to supply their own with fresh malice. Broxham's name still cropped up most frequently, though it now jostled with new suspects. Councilors, clerks, even the vicar himself. It was against this uneasy background that the town gathered for the annual charity auction at the Assembly Rooms. Traditionally, this event raised modest sums for worthy causes and provided larger dividends of entertainment for the bidders, who often enjoyed the thrill of outbidding their neighbors for objects no one wanted. Purbright attended with love, not from interest in brass teapots and needlework samplers, but because he sensed their unseen playwright might not resist the lure of such a stage. The auction began sedately enough, with the sale of a mahogany umbrella stand that leaned as though longing to fall over, followed by a set of mismatched teaspoons. Bidding was light, conversation cheerful, the atmosphere almost ordinary. Yet as Purbright sat near the back, his eyes roved over the room with patient attentiveness, noting who looked too amused, too nervous, too watchful. The disruption came halfway through when the auctioneer, a stout man with spectacles perched precariously on his nose, opened the next lot. He announced it as a fine Victorian prayer book, bound in leather, donated anonymously. As he lifted it high for inspection, murmurs ran through the crowd. Across its cover was pasted a typed label, "The Book of Lies." Love stiffened beside Purbright. "Same type, sir." The auctioneer, flustered, attempted to continue, but when he opened the book, the pages were not scripture at all. Instead, they contained carefully inserted sheets, each typed with parodies of parish records, mock marriages between councilors and improbable brides, births dated decades too late, deaths announced for men still alive and glaring indignantly in the audience. The hall erupted in laughter, shock, and outrage. Councilor Prowse rose furiously. "This is slander!" he shouted. "Forgery! How dare!" But his indignation was drowned by the chorus of townsfolk, some jeering, others cheering, many delighted at the spectacle. The auctioneer, red-faced and sweating, tried to restore order, but each new page brought another wave of hilarity or anger. One sheet proclaimed the mayor had been christened under 3 different names. Another declared the vicar's great-aunt had married a chimney-sweep disguised as a bishop. Love whispered urgently. "They're using the parish records, sir, tampering with them to make fools of everyone." Purbright nodded slowly, his gaze fixed not on the book, but on the faces in the hall. Somewhere, he knew, their culprit was watching, relishing the chaos. The trick was not only to plant the false entries, but to see the town tear itself apart in reacting to them. Then came the final sheet, slipped neatly into the center of the book. Unlike the others, it bore no parody. It contained only a single typed sentence. "The truth hides in plain sight." Beneath it, faint once more, was the telltale smear of green polish. The uproar reached its peak. The auction was abandoned, the book seized by the police, and the townsfolk spilled into the street, buzzing like disturbed bees. Gossip flourished at once. "It proves the treasurer's been cooking the books for years." "No, it's the mayor. He's trying to discredit the parish." "Broxham again, of course. He's the one with old books. Or maybe it's that thin stranger. I've seen him twice now, near the post office." Love gathered fragments of the accusations as if they might crystallize into evidence, but his notebook looked more like a catalogue of madness. He muttered as they walked back to the station. "It's turning into a witch hunt, sir. If this keeps up, someone's going to get hurt." Purbright's reply was soft but firm. "Not hurt, Sergeant. Exposed. Our playwright is pushing the town to the brink of absurdity. When the laughter fades, what remains will be the truth." Back at the station, Purbright examined the book with calm care. Each inserted sheet had been glued along the margin, the edges precise, the typing exact. Yet here and there, beneath the glue, traces of faint pencil marks remained. Notations, numbers, dates. He considered them for a long moment, then closed the book gently. "Do you see, Sergeant?" The joke hides something serious. These pages were not made simply to mock, but to mask. The question is, mask what? Love rubbed his forehead. "So we're back where we started. Someone wants to bury something in those records, but why not just burn the ledger and be done with it?" Purbright's smile was faint. "Because, Sergeant, fire destroys indiscriminately. Our culprit wants precision. They wish to erase or alter one truth while leaving the rest intact. It is the difference between vandalism and forgery." That night, as the streets quieted, Flaxborough lay uneasy. The townsfolk, still buzzing from the auction debacle, carried home new suspicions, sharper quarrels, and a growing sense that their community's very history was under siege. And somewhere among them, a thin man in a grey coat, or perhaps no man at all, was watching, waiting, rehearsing the final act. Purbright, seated by the station window, looked out at the lamplight reflecting on the wet cobbles. "The truth hides in plain sight," he repeated softly. "Then perhaps, Sergeant, we have been looking too hard at the stage and not enough at the audience." Love, weary but intent, asked the only question that mattered. "So who's the real target, sir?" Purbright's gaze lingered on the dark street. "The one who has most to lose if the past is read too carefully." The morning after the auction fiasco, Flaxborough was a town less amused than bruised. Laughter had turned sour, and the jokes about councilors marrying chimney sweeps now carried an edge of resentment rather than mirth. The parody had struck too close to home. People had begun wondering if behind the false entries there might lurk truths they would rather keep buried. Windows rattled with whispered arguments, and family papers were searched with an anxiety that spread faster than influenza. Inspector Purbright, sitting quietly at his desk, allowed the town's agitation to ripple past him like the surface of a pond. He had reached the point where the pattern seemed clear enough to test. The counterfeit chain, the hymn sheets, the pageant scripts, the parody ledgers, each had been an act in a performance designed not merely to entertain, but to distract. And always there had been the same signature: brisk type, green polish, and a velvet thread. The climax, he suspected, was close. Sergeant Love, restless with the tension, looked up from the heap of collected evidence. "They're getting jumpy out there, sir. Mrs. Ellison swears her great-grandfather's name was tampered with in the book, and the mayor's threatening to call in outside investigators. The whole town's convinced their family trees are being chopped down." Purbright gave a small smile. "Yes, Sergeant. And when people fear their roots, they lash out at the nearest gardener." Love frowned. "So what do we do? Wait until the next prank blows up?" "No," Purbright said softly. "We offer our playwright a stage of our own choosing." That afternoon, Purbright invited several townsfolk to the station under the pretext of clarifying statements. The mayor arrived first, his dignity dented but still attempting to glitter. Councilor Prowse followed, puffing indignantly. Mr. Broxham, tight-lipped, sat apart, determined to appear stoic. The treasurer, pale and sweating, clutched his briefcase as though it contained his soul. And finally the vicar entered, his hands twisting nervously as though in silent prayer. Purbright greeted them politely, offering tea all round, then laid out a folder on the table. From it, he withdrew one of the parody sheets discovered at the auction, carefully unfolded. "You will recognize this," he said mildly, though perhaps not in the form it first appeared. The group leaned forward. The page bore not parody this time, but an original entry from the parish register, the same marriage record that had been sent to the vicar with the ominous line, "This union should never have been recorded." Purbright's voice remained calm. "You will notice, of course, the paper. Not from a parish book, but typed on a loose sheet. Yet when slipped among genuine pages, it is nearly indistinguishable." He let the silence stretch, then added almost conversationally, "It is a clever device, but only clever until one notices the scent of polish and the faint thread of velvet caught along the margin, love." Watching closely, saw the mayor's scowl deepen, Prowse's lips thin, Broxham's eyes narrow with weariness. But it was the treasurer who shifted in his seat, adjusting his briefcase with a nervous jerk. Purbright, as if unaware, went on. "Someone has been rehearsing Flaxborough with these little performances. Each jest, each parody, has distracted us while the real work was attempted, the quiet substitution of one truth for another in our records. And so I thought it best to invite you here to see which among you finds this rehearsal most uncomfortable." The treasurer's fingers whitened on the handle of his case. A bead of sweat rolled from his temple. Love caught the movement and glanced quickly at Purbright. The inspector continued in the same even tone. "I dare say, Sergeant, if we were to open that briefcase, we might discover more typed pages prepared for insertion, perhaps even entire sections of the parish register ready to replace what has been removed." The room seemed to tighten. The treasurer's mouth opened, closed, then opened again. "This is outrageous," he stammered. I carry only the borough's accounts." "Accounts," Purbright said gently, "which were already parodied at the council chambers." Curiously, by the same hand, he leaned back, unhurried. "But perhaps you would prefer to prove me mistaken by allowing Sergeant Love to examine them." Love rose, eager, but the treasurer clutched the case closer. His protest came too quickly. "There is no need. Nothing to see but figures, dull figures." At that, Purbright gave the faintest of smiles. "Ah, but dull figures can conceal lively truths, can they not?" The mayor shifted uneasily. Prowse muttered something under his breath. Broxham, for once, looked almost relieved to be ignored. The treasurer's composure frayed. He tried to stand, but Purbright's mild gaze held him still as firmly as any constable's hand. The inspector spoke softly, almost kindly. "You see, gentlemen, the parish ledgers are not merely lists of births and marriages. They are records of legitimacy. If one wished to alter a lineage, to obscure a connection, to erase an inconvenient parentage, one would need to tamper with them. And who better than the man entrusted with the town's books to do so quietly, under cover of comedy?" The treasurer's breath quickened, and with it, the faint sound of a clasp clicking beneath his fingers. Love stepped forward, steady now, and laid a hand on the case. This time, the treasurer did not resist. He sagged back into his chair, eyes downcast. The room exhaled. The mayor straightened with sudden self-importance. Prowse looked vindicated, and Broxham gave a little snort that might almost have been laughter. But Purbright's gaze remained fixed on the treasurer, as calm as ever. "We shall look through your case, sir, with the proper warrant. But already I think we know enough. The curtain is beginning to fall." Love's notebook trembled in his hand as he scribbled the moment. "So it was him all along," he whispered. Purbright did not answer. He was still watching the treasurer, whose shoulders slumped as though the weight of the town's history had at last descended upon them. The treasurer sat hunched in his chair, the leather case on the table before him, his hands limp upon its lid as though it had grown heavier with every passing minute. Silence filled the room after Purbright's quiet challenge. broken only by the ticking of the station clock. Love stood close by, his notebook half forgotten in one hand, ready for the command that would open the case and spill its secrets. Purbright allowed the pause to lengthen until it became almost unbearable. Then, with his customary mildness, he said, "Perhaps, before we trouble ourselves with locks and clasps, our treasurer would like to tell us why he has been rehearsing Flaxborough these past days. It is always better, you know, when an actor chooses to confess his role rather than wait for the curtain call." The treasurer shifted, his face clammy, his lips trembling around words that refused to form. "At last," he muttered, "it wasn't meant to go this far." His voice was hoarse, so low that the mayor leaned forward with an impatient sniff. "Go this far," Prowse barked. "You've made buffoons of us all, paraded the council as if we were a circus. What more could you intend?" The treasurer flinched but pressed on. "I only wanted to cover it, just one record, one marriage that should never have been written down. My grandfather, he was married before he came to Flaxborough, married with a wife still living. If the entry were discovered, every generation after would be branded illegitimate. My position, my family's standing, it would collapse." Love gasped softly, his pencil scratching to catch the words. The mayor sniffed again, this time with satisfaction, while Broxham muttered, "Always the respectable ones." Purbright inclined his head as if the explanation had only confirmed what he already knew. "And so," he said gently, "you devised your rehearsals. A counterfeit chain, a parody of hymns, mock pageant scripts, lampooned accounts, all distractions, each designed to amuse or outrage the town so thoroughly that no one would notice you had slipped into the vestry and lifted the parish registers. Then, with pages prepared on your typewriter, you intended to replace what you feared with safer lines. A family tree rewritten, branches pruned without anyone the wiser, the treasurer covered his face with both hands. But I needed time. Time to make the substitutions. That's why I kept them busy. Jokes, pranks, a little chaos to turn their eyes away." Purbright's gaze softened, though it carried no hint of indulgence. "Yes, but you underestimated the power of your theatre. Laughter spreads quickly, but so does suspicion. Each performance left threads and polish behind, a signature you never noticed, and in your eagerness to distract, you gave me the pattern." Love closed his notebook with a snap. "So all the while they were blaming Broxham, it was you, planning to doctor the records." The treasurer gave no reply. His shoulders sagged, his breath came shallow, and at last he pushed the case towards Love with a resigned hand. Inside, as Purbright had predicted, lay sheets prepared for insertion, typed entries, cut to match the parish ledger, with margins aged artificially and ink darkened with careful strokes. Each bore the same brisk type, each faintly dusted with the green polish that had marked every scene of mischief. The mayor rose, puffed with indignation and self-importance. "This is a disgrace of the highest order. To tamper with history itself. The council will convene at once." Purbright interrupted softly. "History, Mayor, is seldom untampered with. We all tidy our pasts in small ways. Our treasurer merely attempted it on a larger scale, but the record stands, and the town will remain itself. I dare say Flaxborough will find fresh scandals soon enough without altering old ones." There was little left to be said. The treasurer, subdued, was escorted out by Bradshaw. Broxham, released from suspicion at last, allowed himself a sigh that seemed to drain years from his frame. Prowse looked triumphant, while the mayor rehearsed in silence the speech he would deliver to the Chronicle. Only Purbright remained still, his hands folded, his eyes thoughtful. Later that evening, when the bustle had subsided and the town's gossip had already begun reshaping the truth into something more palatable, Purbright and Love walked together along the quiet cobbled street. Lamps cast yellow pools on the wet pavement, and from open windows came the muffled drone of domestic chatter. Love, still digesting the day, said quietly, "It's strange, sir. All those pranks, all that theatre, just to hide one marriage record." Purbright gave a faint smile. "Not so strange, Sergeant. Pride is often worth more than property. A man will risk much to keep his ancestors respectable. In Flaxborough, lineage is a kind of currency. Our treasurer simply tried to print his own notes." Love frowned, then chuckled ruefully, and ended up paying more dearly than if he'd left it alone. "Indeed," Purbright murmured. They passed the church, its doors closed, the hymn board corrected, the vestry once more locked. Beyond, the auction hall lay dark, its echoes still lingering in memory. Flaxborough, bruised but not broken, was settling back into its routines, though every whispered conversation would, for weeks, find its way back to counterfeit chains and parody hymns and the curious theatre of one desperate man. As they reached the square, Purbright paused, looking up at the town hall clock. "You see, Sergeant," he said softly, "the town will not change much. Tomorrow it will talk of Broxham again, or the mayor's speeches, or Mrs. Mallison's carnations. But somewhere in its gossip, perhaps, a few will remember that even history can be tampered with, and that truth, though easily disguised, has a way of standing patiently until it is noticed." Love nodded slowly, his notebook tucked away at last. "And for us, sir?" Purbright allowed himself the faintest of smiles. "For us, Sergeant, another day, another curtain, another play they walked on together, their footsteps quiet on the cobbles, until the square lay empty behind them and Flaxborough's lamps flickered softly against the night.